Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of This Old Game, where we play and talk about games. Old games, or more preferably referred to as retro. Today we're taking a look at Loom, another game from my childhood that stands out for various reasons that we are going to talk about today.
The Last Leaf of Autumn.
Loom is a fantasy adventure game made by the developers that need no introduction. Lucasfilm Games, also known as LucasArts, was released in 1990 and was the fourth game to utilize the famous Scum engine first introduced in the game Maniac Mansion back in 1987. Loom was designed by Brian Moriarty. Mr. Moriarty is an evil mastermind whose only goal is to thwart Sherlock Holmes. Oh, wait. Oh, not that Moriarty. Brian Moriarty, an American video game developer, is known for his work on games like Wishbringer in 1985 and Trinity in 1986, and for taking over development of the game The Dig, another amazing game that we will be covering at a later date for sure. Now let's talk about the music, because music is a huge part of this game. The music of Loom consists mainly of excerpts from the Swan Lake Ballet by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and was arranged for MIDI by George Sanger, whose works include games such as The Seventh Guest and Wing Commander. And just listen to this. That intro song just transports me right back to being a kid. I love it. And I have to make a mention of the game's cover art by Mark Ferrari. Yeah, like the car, I've always found this cover art to be very appealing. Loom is a huge departure from other LucasArts games, and adventure games in general, really. The story of Loom is rather complex for fantasy games of the time, boasting an experimental interface and some logical thinking puzzles, but let's just dive into the story. Happy birthday! Woohoo! You play a guy named Bobbin Threadbare, best name in a video game outside of Guybrush Threepwood, and you just turned the ripe old age of 17. No birthday cake, no prezzies for you. You are summoned by the village elders in order to determine your fate. Apparently, you've been receiving some unsanctioned training from your mentor, Hetchel, and the elders, they're not too happy. Upon arriving at the sanctuary, you witness the elders scolding Hetchel, and then proceed to perform a spell called the Transcendence. But something goes horribly wrong, and she is turned into a swan's egg. In their puzzled bewilderment, the sanctuary is beset upon by a swan that comes crashing in through the windows, turning everyone into more swans, and they fly off, cursing you for just about everything. Great! Turns out, since your birth, lots of bad happenings have been happening. It has been prophesied that our coming of age will bring about the unraveling of the universe. So the elders have determined that we should not be taught the ways of the weavers in order to prevent this from happening. So naturally, it makes sense that Hetchel would defy the elders and teach you anyways, right? So at this point, it's up to you to chase after the elders turned swan, stop something called the Third Shadow from covering the world, and fight something called chaos, and this is just the main plot. The game is a pretty interesting backstory as well. The game actually takes place in the distant future, something like the year 8021. It is established that the age of the great guilds arose when humans once again tried to establish dominion over nature, like we do. People banded together to form city-states devoted to the absolute control of knowledge, held together by stern traditions of pride and of fear. like we do. The humble guild of weavers established themselves as masters of woven fabric, though they eventually transcended the limits of cloth and began to weave subtle patterns of influence into the very fabric of reality. The loom being the symbol of their guild. Lady Signa Threadbare is introduced as a bereaved mother who begs the elders of the Guild of Weavers to use the power of the loom to end the suffering of the weavers. Their numbers are failing and their seed is barren. The elders Atropos, Clothos, and Lachesis are named after Greek mythology's three fates. They reprimand Signa, telling her that it is not their place to play gods. Signa, despite their warnings, secretly assumes control of the loom and plants one gray thread. She inadvertently draws an infant out of the loom, incurring the wrath of the elders. She surrenders the child to Hetchel, whom we've been introduced to already, the old serving woman, and accepts her fate. The elders cast the Transcendence draft on her, transforming her into a swan and banishing her. Hetchel names the child Bobbin and cares for him as her own. And wow, like I said, the story is pretty freaking complex. Now, LucasArts adventure games are well known for implementing the verb interface for interacting with the game world, with commands such as open and pick up and talk to being used to do those actions. Loom's interface was a bit unique in the fact that it replaces verbs with spells played on a musical distaff. Throughout the world, you will come across items or events that, when clicked on, will play out a 4-note tune called a draft that the protagonist, Bobbin Threadbare, can play on his distaff, which sounds really dirty, but it's not. Each spell has an effect such as opening to open things, and even a spell to turn straw into gold. Rumpelstiltskin, eat your heart out. Some spells even have the ability to be played in reverse to reverse the effect. For example, this water spout. This puzzle took me forever to figure out. The game doesn't come right out and tell you that you can, in fact, reverse your spells. And I can't tell you how many times I got sucked up and spit out by this thing. It was so frustrating. At the time, I think I stopped playing the game for the better part of a year before returning and figuring out what I needed to do. But yeah, the draft is more representing of something that is twisted. So if you play the spell backwards, it essentially untwists the water spout. Makes sense? And well, there you go. Finally, you can continue. Once you figure this out, it makes the rest of the game quite a bit easier to navigate. Now, at the start of the game, you only have access to spells using notes C, D, and E, limiting the ability to reproduce more powerful drafts, but as the game progresses, additional notes will become available and new drafts will also become available. The game offers 3 levels of difficulty at the startup of the game: Standard, Practice, and Expert. I wouldn't recommend starting on Expert unless you are familiar with music, as there are no notes and the game is played entirely by ear. One interesting bit of trivia that even I did not know, because I was never brave enough to play on Expert: at the end of the game, the face of Bobbin Threadbare, which is normally shrouded under the hood of his robe, is revealed. Might just have to try this out myself at some point, as that sounds pretty cool. Now, Loom, by all accounts, was a critical success as far as reception went. However, it failed to sell in sufficient numbers to warrant sequels, which is a real shame because Loom is one of the most unique and interesting stories that, in my opinion, have ever been written. However, 2 sequels were in fact imagined. One was called Forge. It tells the story of Bobbin's friend Rusty Nailbender, whose home city, the Forge of the Blacksmiths, was enslaved by chaos near the end of Loom, and the other is called The Fold, about Fleece Firmflanks, and her attempt to unite the shattered guilds in a final desperate effort to banish chaos. To me, this sounds really awesome, and I would have loved to have seen these games come to fruition, but alas. Well, that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective look back at one of the more interesting titles of the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. You've been awesome. Let's play again soon, and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you enjoyed this video, I would like to invite you to check out my other videos and do consider subscribing. There's more where this came from. And if you have any games from your childhood that may be considered retro and you would like to see me do a video on it, let me know in the comments.